Emily Carter thought it was just one unforgettable night with a charming stranger in London, but when Ryan Brooks reappeared in her life across the ocean, their whirlwind romance turned into a deadly obsession, proving that love, when twisted by control, can kill just as swiftly as hate. The night air in London felt alive, thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of weekend energy pulsing through the streets. Emily Carter wandered through Soho's glowing alleys, with no destination in mind, just a quiet ache in her chest she couldn't name. Her Italy trip had been cancelled at the last minute, and instead of sulking at home, she decided to explore her own city like a stranger. She wore a red silk dress, the kind that fluttered around her knees and caught the light, not to impress anyone, but to feel like her life still shimmered, even when things fell apart. Inside the rooftop bar, the music buzzed softly under her skin. Everything felt just slightly out of reach, like she was watching herself from the outside. She ordered a drink and leaned against the railing, watching the London skyline flicker as if the city were breathing. Then she saw him, tall, dark hair, confident without being arrogant. He looked out of place, like someone dropped into the scene by mistake. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, she felt something unexpected. Recognition, curiosity, or was it just the loneliness folding itself into attraction? Ryan Brooks, visiting from the U.S. on business, had no intention of being at that bar. He had followed a colleague's suggestion, hoping to avoid another boring dinner alone in his hotel suite. But the second he saw Emily, something shifted. Not just in the way men notice beautiful women, there was something magnetic, urgent about her. She seemed both distant and full of life, like she had 100 secrets she would never say aloud. When their eyes locked, a strange sense of inevitability settled over him. He didn't know her name, her story, or even why he felt drawn, but he did. Their conversation flowed easily, and time melted. Emily laughed in a way she hadn't in months, surprised by her own ease with this stranger. She didn't ask many questions about him. That was the beauty of it. No backstory, no pressure, just this night, suspended in time. The rooftop lights glimmered off their glasses as they talked about everything and nothing, places they'd been, music they loved, small things that felt suddenly important. She told herself not to fall into it. He was leaving soon, and she didn't believe in fate or movie magic moments, but still, something about Ryan made her heart shift in its rhythm. When the night ended, they hugged goodbye at the elevator, and Emily walked away with a quiet, bittersweet smile. She didn't ask for his number, and he didn't offer. It was supposed to remain a beautiful memory, a rare, perfect mistake. But as she walked home, heels clicking against the wet pavement, she kept replaying his voice in her mind. Low, calm, curious. She convinced herself she'd forget him. She never would. Ryan stood still long after she disappeared into the London crowd. His fingers itched to follow her, but he didn't. Not yet. What began as a chance encounter would soon grow into something far darker, but for now, he let the illusion breathe. Just one night, just enough to plant the seed. The towering skyline of Manhattan loomed ahead as Emily stepped out of her cab, the city buzzing louder than she remembered. New York had always overwhelmed her senses. The scale, the speed, the invisible current that seemed to pull people along whether they were ready or not. She had been invited to speak at a travel bloggers conference, a surprise opportunity that felt like a reward after months of creative drought. Still, something in her gut twisted with an unnamed anxiety. She chalked it up to jet lag, not knowing it was something much deeper. As she entered the sleek lobby of the hotel, she scanned the room casually, expecting nothing out of the ordinary, but then her heart stopped. Standing by the marble counter, leaning slightly against his suitcase, was Ryan. That same easy posture, that same face she hadn't been able to fully erase from her memory, no matter how hard she tried. Her breath caught in her throat. He turned like he'd felt her presence before even seeing her, and smiled as if he'd just bumped into an old friend at a coffee shop. For a moment, the world shrank. Her thoughts tangled in disbelief. He said he had seen her name on the conference's website and decided to attend. A coincidence, he claimed, casually brushing it off like it meant nothing. But inside, Emily's mind spun. Was this fate, or something else? Part of her wanted to question it, to push away the rush of warmth rising in her chest. But another part, lonelier, softer, wanted to believe the universe had brought him back to her. The days that followed blurred into a dream. Ryan swept her into a version of New York she'd never experienced before. Dinners at rooftop restaurants, secret jazz bars in Brooklyn, quiet walks through Central Park just before dawn. He seemed to remember everything she liked, her favorite wine, the way she always looked at the sky before taking a photo, the specific kind of quiet she needed when writing. She told herself it was romantic, that he had paid attention, but a faint unease gnawed at the edges of her joy. How could he know so much from just one night? Ryan introduced her to his world with pride, as if she were a trophy he'd been waiting to show off. He worked in high-level finance, constantly moving between cities, closing deals, living fast. Emily felt like she had stepped into someone else's life, one of luxury, attention, and charm. But the pace left her breathless. Whenever she tried to slow things down or create space, he pulled her in tighter, always with a smile, always with another perfect gesture. There were no red flags, not yet. Just shadows, soft and slithering, hiding behind candlelit dinners and rooftop kisses. Emily told herself she was being paranoid. He had come all this way just to see her again. That had to mean something, didn't it? But beneath her growing affection, a voice whispered quietly, "Nothing this perfect ever comes without a cost." And she didn't yet know how much she'd already begun to pay. Emily's days in Manhattan melted into weeks, and before she realized it, she was living two lives. One, the familiar world she left behind in London, felt like a distant dream. The other, polished, intoxicating, and filled with Ryan, was unfolding rapidly, almost recklessly. She moved between penthouse views and lavish dinner parties, all carefully curated by a man who seemed to revolve entirely around her. He spoiled her with designer gifts, handwritten notes, and sudden weekend getaways. But behind the sparkle, something quieter crept into her spirit, a subtle shift she couldn't explain. Ryan's apartment was spotless, cold even. Everything in its place, nothing personal, no childhood photos, no signs of a past. It was like he existed only in the present, and only through her eyes. He would watch her with an intensity that felt both flattering and strange, as though he was memorizing her, studying the tiniest changes in her expression. At first, it made her feel seen, but soon, it began to feel like surveillance. She couldn't name it without sounding dramatic, so she kept the thought buried. He encouraged her to rest more, to spend less time on her laptop, to pause her blog for a while. "Just enjoy the moment," he'd say with a soft smile, brushing her hair behind her ear. She wanted to believe it was care, not control. She rationalized it. She told herself that maybe he was right, maybe she was always working, always writing, never really living. But every time she tried to step back into her creativity, she felt the weight of his silence. His disappointment was never loud. It came in size, in distance, in a look that lasted just a second too long. He began to isolate her in ways that didn't look like isolation. He'd suggest that certain friends were jealous or toxic. He'd subtly critique the people she trusted. At first, she dismissed it. But over time, she found herself pulling away, not answering messages, not checking her notifications. When her best friend Sophie confronted her during a brief call, asking if she was okay, Emily had hesitated longer than she should have. That silence haunted her after the call ended. Emily started to notice how Ryan always needed to know where she was, even when she went out just for a walk. He tracked her through small things, "Just to make sure you're safe," he'd insist. And somehow she believed him. He was always watching out for her, wasn't he? She told herself it was love. Yet when she stood in front of the mirror one morning wearing a dress Ryan had chosen for her, makeup done exactly the way he liked, She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her once bold spirit now felt like a softened outline, fading around the edges. Somewhere deep inside, something clenched, a warning, a whisper, almost drowned out by comfort and luxury. But she ignored it. She had to, because if she listened, she would have to admit the truth, that the love wrapping itself around her so tightly might be the very thing beginning to suffocate her. The evening before her flight back to London, Emily stood in Ryan's apartment, folding the last of her clothes and tucking away souvenirs, small memories of the whirlwind weeks she had spent in New York. The city had changed her. She wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. She had told Ryan gently that it was time to return home, that she missed her space, her pace, her voice. He had smiled, but something behind his eyes had flickered. Not anger, not quite, but something colder, sharper. She noticed it and brushed it aside. She reached for her passport from the bedside drawer where she had left it, where it always was, and felt a sharp chill ripple down her spine when her hand came up empty. She pulled the drawer open completely. Nothing. She opened her suitcase again, rifled through every zipper, every pocket, still nothing. Her pulse quickened, and a knot began to form in her stomach. She went through her belongings again, slower this time, then again, more frantically. It didn't make sense. She was meticulous about her travel documents, always had been. Ryan entered the room just as she was lifting cushions off the couch. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes already knew. She told him her passport was gone, and he immediately offered to help her search. They tore through the apartment together, or rather, she did. He mostly hovered. After an hour, she slumped onto the edge of the bed, her heart pounding, her thoughts spiraling. She felt like a child, helpless and trapped in a place that had once felt safe. Ryan sat beside her, his hand warm on her back. "It's okay," he said softly. "These things happen." But she could barely hear him. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had she dropped it somewhere? Was it stolen? No. She was sure she had left it in that drawer. Absolutely sure. That kind of certainty doesn't just dissolve. He called the airline. He said, told her to relax, said they'd figure it out. She barely nodded. Her thoughts weren't just on the missing passport anymore. They were on everything that had felt just a little off these past few weeks. His subtle control, her silenced blog, the slow disappearance of her independence. Was this a coincidence? Or something deliberate? The next morning, her flight departed without her. She stayed another week, dazed, unable to explain even to herself why she hadn't booked an emergency appointment at the consulate, why she hadn't fought harder. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was afraid of the answers. Ryan was attentive, kind again, almost overly so. He made her breakfast, bought her flowers, said how glad he was to have her for just a bit longer. Back in London, Sophie noticed the silence. Emily's usual travel posts had vanished. Her Instagram stories stopped. Her texts grew brief and infrequent. Sophie tried calling, but the tone in Emily's voice had changed. It was softer, caged. Then, one night, Emily whispered over the phone that she was scared. And then she disappeared. The sky was overcast the morning. Her body was found. A jogger had taken their usual path along the narrow, secluded trail that curved beside a still lake in upstate New York. The jogger paused when they saw something caught between the rocks at the edge of the water. Something pale, unnatural still. The body was bloated from days in the lake, but the face was unmistakable once the authorities identified her. Emily Carter, aged, a British national reported missing just 2 weeks earlier. Her name had barely made it to local news. Now it was on every headline. News of Emily's death rippled across 2 countries. In London, Sophie collapsed into tears the moment she heard. Her hands trembled as she replayed their final phone call. Emily's whisper etched into her memory. "I'm scared." She had known something was wrong. She had felt it in her bones, and now it was too late. The guilt came crashing in like a wave, leaving her gasping and hollow. In New York, The police launched an immediate investigation. The autopsy revealed what many feared, but few wanted to believe. Emily hadn't drowned by accident. There was water in her lungs, yes, but also deep bruising to the back of her head, as though she had been struck. And then there was the sedative, uncommon, powerful, still present in her system. Enough to paralyze. Not enough to kill. Someone wanted her helpless. Someone wanted control. All signs pointed toward Ryan Brooks. Detectives began retracing her final movements. Security footage from his upscale apartment building showed Emily entering days before her body was discovered. She was never seen leaving. Ryan, when questioned, said she had gone for a walk and never returned. He hadn't reported her missing. He claimed he assumed she had flown back to London. But there were no flight bookings, no activity on her bank cards, no messages sent, only silence. Ryan's demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed. He answered every question with ease, never hesitating. He even offered to help search her last known locations. But behind his controlled tone, investigators noted the lack of grief. Not once did he ask, "What happened to her?" He spoke of her in past tense before anyone had officially declared her dead. Those subtle slips didn't go unnoticed. The lake where Emily was found was private, rarely accessed by outsiders. But Ryan had a history there. A ranch cabin nearby, visited multiple times over the past year. Neighbors recalled seeing a black car parked near the trailhead, just days before the discovery. The pieces began to fall into place, but not fast enough. With no witnesses and no forensic evidence linking Ryan directly to the scene, police were forced to let him go. 3 days in custody. Then freedom. The public was outraged. Social media exploded with theories, with fury, with mourning. Sophie refused to stay silent. She shared Emily's story, her fears, their final conversation. The world began to pay attention, but the man at the center of it all remained composed, calculating, watching. Emily was gone, but the truth was just beginning to surface. In London, rain slipped down the windows of a quiet office in the Metropolitan Police's cold case unit. A detective named Claire Hammond sat at her desk, staring at a name she hadn't seen in years. Emily Carter. News of the British travel blogger's mysterious death in New York had recently reached the UK, and while the public grieved a promising life cut short, something in the back of Claire's mind stirred. She remembered the name from a case buried in her files. Julian Mark, a photographer found dead in his bathtub in 2018, drowned, ruled an accident. Emily Carter had been his girlfriend. Claire reopened the file, brushing dust from its surface. Julian's death had always left her unsettled. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, but there had been one strange detail, a rare sedative found in his system, the kind that required a specific prescription. In the UK. Back then it hadn't been enough to pursue charges, but it had raised suspicions. Emily, at the time, had given a calm, cooperative interview. She had been out walking when he died. Grieving. Composed. The evidence was thin, and the case went cold. But now Emily was dead, and again the same sedative was found in her body. Claire felt a deep unease. Was this a coincidence? Or was something far more sinister weaving through these tragedies? She began pulling reports, tracing connections and searching for patterns. When she requested access to Emily's digital records, she noticed something strange. Her laptop, one she was known to carry everywhere, was never recovered after her death. Vanished. The last IP activity on her blog had come from New York, days before her disappearance, but the access logs showed a login from a British server long after she was confirmed missing. Meanwhile, in the States, the FBI had joined the investigation. Forensics were still combing through Ryan Brooks's devices and personal accounts. They were subtle about it. He was no ordinary suspect. His business ties gave him power. His charm gave him cover, but his online history revealed cracks in the polished exterior. He had visited forums about sedatives, searched obscure chemicals, and weeks before Emily's death, he had placed an order using a false identity. One connected an IP address in London. A technical detail, almost invisible, but damning. The investigators on both sides of the Atlantic were beginning to see the full picture. Ryan hadn't just killed Emily, he had studied her, watched her, used her, and possibly even framed her. The sedative found in Julian Mark's system, was it planted? Was Emily carrying guilt all along, or had she been trying to escape a shadow that had been following her for years? The idea was chilling. In Claire's office, she stared at the two victims, Julian and Emily, two different countries, two different lives, connected by one man. Claire felt a tightness in her chest. Emily may have run, but she hadn't been running from guilt. She had been running from him, and he had followed, relentlessly, quietly, until he took everything. The arrest came quietly. No sirens, no chaos, just a calculated interception at JFK International Airport as Ryan Brooks approached the boarding gate for a first-class flight to Dubai. He moved with the same calm confidence he always had, unaware that every step was being watched, every move logged. When the officers surrounded him, his expression barely changed. No panic, no confusion, just the slight narrowing of his eyes, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. What he hadn't expected was how completely the truth had unraveled. Behind the scenes, digital forensics had done what silence could not. Investigators traced the sedative found in Emily's system to an illegal purchase made 6 months earlier. The transaction had been masked under layers of false accounts and encrypted emails, but one overlooked detail, the recovery of a cached IP address, placed the origin of the purchase in London, from a device registered to Emily's name. At first, it looked like she had ordered the drug herself. That was what Ryan wanted. But digging deeper revealed that the IP had been accessed after Emily had already gone missing. It wasn't her. It was him. He had used her stolen laptop, still missing from the crime scene, to forge a trail. He hadn't just killed her, he had tried to erase her. To rewrite her story so that she would carry not only the weight of her own death but also the suspicion of Julian. The pattern was clear now. Ryan hadn't stumbled into Emily's life by fate. He had orchestrated it. Tracked her through her blog after their brief meeting in London. Read her words, studied her habits. Found where she'd be next. Their reunion in New York wasn't coincidence, it was obsession. He had done it all under the guise of love. In the courtroom, Ryan sat like a statue. No visible remorse. His eyes scanned the room without emotion, like a man trying to stay in control even as the world collapsed around him. Sophie sat in the front row, her hands shaking, tears staining her cheeks. She had carried Emily's story when Emily could no longer tell it. And now, justice felt both close and impossibly far. The trial revealed everything. The manipulation, the staged coincidences, the stolen identity, and the forensic evidence, the keystrokes, the timestamps, the digital fingerprints, painted a picture more horrifying than anyone imagined. Ryan wasn't just controlling, he was methodical, patient, a predator who disguised his obsession as affection. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Ryan didn't flinch. Life without parole. No possibility of ever walking free again. Still, he didn't speak. Perhaps silence was his final power. But this time, it belonged to no one but him. Emily's memory lived on, in the voices that refused to be silenced. In the headlines that exposed him, in the investigation that uncovered, not just a murder, but a pattern of control and possession, masked as romance. She had trusted someone for only one night, and in that single night, she had unknowingly given her heart to a man who believed that love meant ownership, and that if he couldn't have her, no one would. The illusion was over. The truth was undeniable, and the cost of it all was a life that had only just begun to